I think the Battle of Franklin is as important and relevant today as it ever was. And I think especially in recent years, the resurgence of interest in this story has shown that to really understand how the war ended, you have to come through Middle Tennessee. You've got to go to Spring Hill. You've got to come to Franklin. You've got to visit Carter House and Carnton and now Rippavilla and really get a sense of what was at stake. The talking point that people don't know history like they used to, or that, for example, young people don't appreciate history like prior generations, is really a bit of almost like a red herring. And Franklin is a prime example. This battlefield was completely lost. I mean, it was just covered up and obliterated. Carter House and Carnton and Rippavilla didn't even open until the latter part of the 20th century. So I think the older generations, with all due respect, have done a really fantastic job at completely forgetting about this history, as if it wasn't important.
This is the turning point where we're finally starting to come to almost a reckoning over issues that we haven't resolved in 157 years. And now we have an opportunity, here especially, because we do it every day at all three sites. We do it on social media, on our YouTube page, which you're watching this on right now. We continue to confront issues from the American Civil War that have never gone away, that we're still dealing with problems with race, and we're still dealing with problems with equality. And it continues to be in our face every single day. And being here, being able to talk about the American Civil War in an honest and open way and encourage discussion, I think that that's part of why this place stays so relevant.
Today, when people talk about revisionism or, whatever sort of pejorative they want to throw out, I think they miss the point. There's a whole group of people in the last 15 or 20 years that have helped reclaim this story, and not just to talk about the military action, but why the war matters. And if you can get people to understand why the war matters, then what happens at the end of this war is tremendously impactful. We promised years ago we were going to tell people a bigger story. And what better place to learn about that, to hear about that, to maybe even have your preconceived notions about what all of this means than right here, to be at the place where the event unfolded, where history was made.
We have a very unique opportunity, given the power of place. You can write about it, you can give a classroom lecture about it, but standing in Winder's bedroom with an amputation table right there helps you to feel and visualize what took place here. A couple days ago, and now it's perfect because the weather's just right, the lighting is just right, the colors are right. I was closing up Carter House. And there's nothing quite like looking out over the Carter Garden as the sun's starting to set and it's 55, 60 degrees. You get a moment to feel what the conditions looked like, what it sounded like, what it felt like on November 30th, 1864. You can never visualize what took place there, though. And I don't know that it could ever be recreated. You could never put it together in your head. You could never come up with an accurate enough picture. And I think that's the power of place. And that's why 157 years later, these sites are so special, because you're able to come here, be it a child or retired family out on vacation. You get a moment to come into these places and for just an hour, gain the perspective of people that died long before many of us were ever born.
So what stands out 157 years later? That it actually happened. I know even for myself, having done this for a long time, I sometimes have to reckon with that it really happened. I think soldiers who survived it had to do that, and I see it with guests. Sometimes I think our job is to remind people this wasn't a movie, it's not a reenactment. You didn't just read about it in a book. This really happened. From the comfort of our own time frame, I think sometimes we take that for granted. We think we're so divided and we think that things are so terrible right now. I would argue nothing compares to 1864. This was as bad as the war ever was. And it was this bad and this violent right up almost until the very bitter end. That's what Franklin is to really come to grips with this is what we did as Americans, and largely white Americans, beating each other to death for 4 years, trying to decide what direction the United States was going to take. That's why we were redefined. And yes, is it different on the anniversary of the event? Of course. That's your window to kind of look back in time and, as best we can, imagine what it was like. 2006 was the first year that we did what we now call the annual illumination. I stood in the square, which today is vastly different than it was then, amid a sea of Confederate flags, and watched as a handful of people turned their back on the US flag when the Star-Spangled Banner was played. That was an eye-opening experience. That was in 2006. It wasn't 1866 or 1960. I watched it happen with my own eyes.
I think that the Battle of Franklin is still relevant today, 157 years later, because the stories are still relatable. The human lives that are impacted are still relatable. At the end of the day, it's about the humanity and, in large part, the inhumanity of what unfolds here that keeps drawing us back towards it. And we keep finding new things all the time. The story is never done being written. It continues to evolve, it continues to change, and we continue to find new ways to look at the same thing that we've looked at for 100 years. That small chapter is part of an even bigger outlook on American history. And I think that just by looking at Franklin alone, we're able to continue to look at the other battles that take place throughout the war and the other things that happen that are going to continue to redefine this nation up until yesterday.